This video is going to be all about the repairs and modifications we have to make to this central console in order to get our Zebrano trim kit to fit. Now, in the previous videos, we've painted this and it's come up really nice. We've carpeted it, we've repaired the foam, but you can see that practically every little bit of plastic here is cracked. This piece along the top here is actually cracked off completely. And if you look at all of these sort of fittings here, you can see that that there is cracked, that this here is cracked. So we've got an awful lot of repairs to do, and I'm going to show you the method that we've used to repair those bits. The very first thing we're going to do is start with this Zebrano piece here that goes over the gear shift. Now, on the earlier cars, I've mentioned this before, but these central consoles were slightly different on earlier cars than on later cars. So if you go along and buy a new trim kit, you'll find that this doesn't necessarily fit inside. We're going to have to shave a bit off the bottom, and we're going to have to sand down the edges to get it to fit. And also you might find that the two holes don't exactly align either. After we've done that, we're going to set about modifying this back plate here, making up some plastic pieces and gluing them on to repair those fittings there. And finally, we're going to have to repair this section here. Now, I think I do have that plastic section somewhere, but we're going to have to repair that so it's not going to break again. The way we're going to repair these plastic fittings here is by gluing on square metal nuts on the bottom and actually using machine screws rather than Phillips screws, and that should stop those plastic bits cracking in the future. It's worth mentioning that most of these plastic trim pieces get cracked because people do not know how to take them off. For example, you know, to get this all to pieces, the first thing you've got to do is take the ashtray out, and it's pretty obvious that there are two screws here holding the ashtray in. Once you've taken the ashtray out, it reveals these two screws here, but people often are not aware that there's a peg, a plastic peg that fits through there, and if you just yank that thing off, you'll snap the peg off. And the second thing is to get this central piece out here, you have to take out, obviously it varies on the age of your car. On older cars, they had clip-in sliders like these. Now these are like hen's teeth, really, really difficult to get hold of. If anyone's got any of these, one of these or two of these, I'll definitely buy them, but because the ones we've got are both cracked. And the reason they're cracked is people don't know how to get them out. They kind of leave them out from these thin bits here. And what you have to do is leave them out from the thick bits. And once you've done that, you'll reveal those two screws. But if you don't know about those two screws and you just merely try and yank this out, which is what somebody's previously done on this car, you'll end up breaking the plastic fittings just as somebody has done. And same again here, if you don't know how to get the stereo out, you'll just end up cracking the whole thing, which is what's happened on this central console. It'd be nice if this piece fitted perfectly inside there, but it doesn't. It's slightly tight on the edges here, and it's tight on the edges there, and it's too long by about that much. As I mentioned, these central consoles in the older SLs are different. So what I'm doing is I'm just very slowly but surely sanding down the edges to just get a perfect fit. And then we're going to cut that end bit off. I'm probably going to do that with a hacksaw and then sand it smooth, because the last thing I want to do is have any danger of chipping that veneer. That would be a disaster. We're going to cut that along there, hopefully without splintering and wrecking the whole thing. We're about halfway so far, so good. And we haven't split the wood yet. It's not a fast process, but we want to do this slowly. To get this to fit, we've shaved the top bit off, but we need to actually modify the spike. The spike that came with this is at the wrong angle and we can't get it to fit. So we have just cut our own piece of plastic, and we're just using a raw plug that's kind of countersunk in there, and then we're going to use some JB Weld just to glue that in. We'll just clamp that in overnight, and that should be dry in the morning and ready to fit. It's the next morning and our peg is glued in there, and it just remains to be seen whether we've got it in the right position. We have. There should be a little gap here because there's a piece of carpet that normally sits in there. So that's pretty good, and these holes here have to line up, because if this is too far forward or too far back, the gear, if you've got an automatic car, the gears shift won't be aligned. So that's got to be exactly right. Those two holes have got to exactly line up over those two holes. I decided exactly how I'm going to do this, but we've just got this from a builder's merchant, and I may be able to use this plastic to cut out the shapes that we need. Start off doing here is making up this section here. I'm going to use this plastic bracket to do it. So we've just cut off a corner section here, hopefully exactly the right angles. Gluing down this line along the bottom there, and that should give us 3 beads of glue, which should give us a pretty strong finish. Next up, we are going to cut this section off here, leaving that corner on there, and just cut up to there. Okay, and we'll just get a little bit of sandpaper on there and smooth that down, and then I'm hoping that we'll be able to glue that piece in. Obviously just chop it along off the top, and that will make a perfect bond. Next we need to cut the top of that off and then drill a hole where that black dot is and countersink it. Not a quick process. We're stepping up the holes because it's quite easy to break this little bit of plastic. Finally, what we've got to do is just countersink the hole. So there we go. That's our finished item there. All we have to do is glue that on like so. Now, those tiny little gaps there, I was going to use super glue to glue this on, but I think actually I'll use JB Weld, because JB Weld will fill in those tiny little gaps and give us a super solid bond. Mixed up some JB Weld here, and all we have to do now is very carefully apply it. Do not want to get this all over the place if we can possibly avoid it. Doesn't matter if we get a little bit of squeeze out, because you can sand this off, but we don't want to get too much because we want a flat surface. Good thing about using this as opposed to super glue is that it's not an instantaneous bond, so you can move it around if you need to. That is the finished product there. Now, I've just realised you should always measure 3 times and cut once, and it's the same when drilling holes, because I've realised that I've actually drilled the countersink on the wrong side. It should be on the other side, which is slightly counterintuitive. We can recover from that. It's not a major issue, just a little bit annoying. We have just very carefully applied glue to the underside of these square nuts here, and what we'll do is we'll unscrew those two there. Hopefully we won't have glued them in, and that will leave us 2 nuts screwed to the underside there. And then when we come to put the central panel in, what we'll find is, rather than screwing through plastic and actually trying to expand the plastic, we've drilled in a 5mm hole in there. The screws will just drop through, and they'll be screwing into the nuts below rather than into the plastic. It's the next morning, and we're going to see if we can take these screws out. Hopefully they will not have been glued in. I'm turning, which is good. What we're left with is 2 M5 nuts glued in there. So there's going to be no danger in future of this plastic cracking, because we've drilled 5mm holes, and these screws are just going to fall through the plastic and attach to the nuts. This repair has come out really well, and if all has gone to plan, these holes will actually line up. Holes do line up. Now we've got some countersunk machine screws on order that will fit perfectly in there. So this is all starting to look really good. Our next challenge is to reattach this broken piece here, and I think we're going to use super glue for that. There's huge chunks missing out the top and also on the front here, where people have, well, somebody's fitted a stereo and they've obviously drilled all sorts of holes. I think, but because this is kind of under tension, we can't clamp it. So we can't use JB Weld. I'm going to use super glue and just hold it in position, and then maybe look to strengthen everything afterwards. Okay, we have glued that with super glue. Next up, we're going to try and make up this complicated shape here and glue it in. And in order to do so, we've made a little template that fits in there perfectly. And we're going to use one of these brackets here to make that up, and then we're going to cut that corner off, bearing in mind we've got to account for the width of the hacksaw blade, and then we're going to stick a piece on there. Just cut that corner off there, and the plan is to shape this and get it to fit in there. What we'll do is glue a flat bit on the front there. You end up with a really awkward shape like that. Our calculations are correct. That should perfectly fit in there, which it does. So we're just going to put some super glue on here and hopefully glue this piece in. We finished repairing this top section here. It's not perfect, but it's a million times better than it was. And that's now quite solid. We just have to finish this central console by finding a piece of plastic to go across here where the stereo basket sits, like so. What we're going to do is try and glue a piece of plastic along here, and then we're going to bend that plastic and get it to fit in this broken gap here, and that will give it much more strength than just trying to glue a thin piece of plastic across there. You will use this old leftover piece of guttering and just cut a 20cm strip out of it. We have just cut the end of that at a slight angle, fits in there perfectly, and what we're going to do is heat this over gas and try and bend it exactly along that line. Hopefully, if our calculations are correct, which they are, that'll be level with the top there. That angle is perfect, and we just need to cut that to length and glue that in. Well, that's not quite perfect, but it is pretty close. In theory, all we have to do is trim that bit off with the angle grinder, and that should fit perfectly. We trim that down with the angle grinder, it fits perfectly. We just need to super glue that in there now. Took absolutely ages to repair this central console, almost a week by the time you've ordered bits and pieces, allowed glue to dry, etc. I'm pleased at how it's all come out. It's a million times better than it was, with no cracked bits of plastic. We've put metal nuts on the back of there, so that's now secure. It fits perfectly in here. We've secured this bit in, made a really complicated plastic piece to fit in there. We've secured the top stereo bit in and given it extra stability by making it out of one piece and bending it down. I don't think that's going anywhere. The last thing we've got to do is just attach these brackets on, and it just so happens that the angle of this guttering is exactly the same as that, so we'll cut those brackets out here. We'll probably sand back this foam here, glue them on with either GAB weld or super glue, and then Gorilla Glue over that and sand it down flat. Before I do that, I'm going to go down to the car and actually just try fitting this, because these brackets here screw through the foam backing mats that we've made up, and it's possible that I may actually lay magnets in here and attach that magnetically rather than having to screw through the new footwells that have just been welded in. And there we have it. After maybe a decade or more, this car has finally got a nice central console fitted. It took us ages to repair that central console from the parts car, but it's actually all fits in there nicely, lines up nicely. I think it looks gorgeous with the new Soprano wood trim. I could never have imagined when I bought this car off eBay just over a year ago how much work would be involved in actually putting it back together. It's not as if the parts that came with the car just fitted on and bolted on. So far we've had to refurbish every single part, the interior of all the doors, the footwells, the wood veneer, the boot springs, everything we've had to either replace or refurbish. So it's certainly taking longer than I envisaged, but we are slowly getting there, and I hope you'll agree that this car is starting to look more and more like the luxury cruiser that once it was. Got our drain pipe brackets from Travis Perkins. They weren't cheap actually, £2.28 plus VAT, but this is made by Osma, and the reason for mentioning that is it's a type of plastic that doesn't crack. You can bend that back on itself and it won't crack, which is exactly what you want for this kind of repair. Plus it has this little lip in here, which is what we needed to make that really complicated section. Similarly, this black plastic guttering that the builders left is a type of plastic that doesn't crack. And if you heat it up, you can actually bend it into shape and then it hardens in the shape you want it. And that's going to be perfect for repairing these sliders here, because this is a shiny plastic, and you'll notice that's the same on here. And these little profiled curves will be perfect for the edges there. Video there. I hope I've given you some ideas on how to repair the cracked plastic bits on your Mercedes, should you need to do so.